Hi everyone, welcome to the Hands On CISO podcast. My name is Adi, and today we'll be talking to Taylor Yarn, Chief of Staff and Head on Information Security at N1 Health. Taylor, great to have you on the podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. It's getting pretty cold in Boston, but I'm just happy to be here. And thanks for having me on the chat. I think it'll be a really good experience. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much. So I think before anything else, I'd love to hear how you ended up in the position that you are. Like, what was your security journey like?
Yeah, so I think I have a pretty interesting one. So I started out at N1 Health as a senior software engineer with virtually no cybersecurity or information security experience at all. One of our founders, who had been there for 5 or so years at that point, was leaving. I didn't know this at the time, but essentially we were given, a bunch of us were given a opportunity to take on this thing called high trust, which in the healthcare world, that is sort of the gold standard of certifications for security, and we needed to get it. I kind of wanted to get career growth in this startup, so I said, I'll do it. And that kind of started off my journey. So it was kind of by necessity that I found myself in the cybersecurity world. And it was really just, it was quite an experience kind of learning it all, kind of ad hoc and really on a timeline, because we need to get this, because a lot of contracts in the healthcare world actually require you to have high trust certification. So that was kind of how I got into cybersecurity, and I've been here sort of ever since.
Interesting. And do you think that doing cybersecurity in the health tech is significantly different, or do you think it would have been similar in different fields?
I think it would be similar. Healthcare, especially we're a cloud-based startup, so we have no real physical location or anything. It's different in the way that there's a lot less controls that we have to actually worry about in information security. But we have also a lot more stringency because high trust is very, very kind of close to you. They really audit you, and it's quite a difficult certification to get. So I can't say it'd be super different outside of the healthcare tech world, besides the fact that there would be a lot more stuff I'd have to worry about, especially in different companies. You have to worry about different things.
Interesting. And what does a day-to-day look like?
So I try to really make a schedule with my day-to-day. So like certain things happen every day, certain things happen every week, certain things happen every month. I usually try to start my day by reviewing a bunch of newsletters I have to kind of see all the new cyber threats, any more vulnerabilities, and then seeing if any of them are actually applicable to our industry or kind of our components and assets in the healthcare world, specifically at N1. I also kind of throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the day, I'm kind of tasked with policing the company as far as making sure we're following our standards, making sure all our policies and procedures are upheld, and answering general questions. We have around 50 people at this company right now, grown from 20 originally when I started. And they just kind of have a lot of questions because they're working with very sensitive information that they may not have had a lot of experience with. So they're like, oh, can I do this? And I'm like, no, you can't. You can't send this over email without encrypting it, things like that. So it's really a lot of kind of just person to person talking and making sure that everyone's kind of aware of how to keep this information safe. Because if there was a breach at this company, it would just kind of be done, at least in the healthcare world.
Interesting. And I guess you've been in the company from quite early, so you've really helped build the culture around security. But how does it work? How do you get people to actually care that much and come to you with questions?
From other CISOs I've talked to, culture is always the most difficult thing, and it is the most difficult thing in this company as well. People come here because they want to grow their careers and just do their job. They're not as interested. Obviously, they don't want the company to fail, but the last thing they're really thinking about is information security. So generally, when people start, I obviously have an onboarding session with them to teach them about information security of the company, kind of our standards and what we do. And always in that meeting, I try and make them understand the stakes. I don't want to have a culture of fear, but I do want them to have an understanding of exactly why information security is important and why it's extremely important that we keep our sensitive data secure and not get breached or not have any incidents. Because at the end of the day, if that happens, especially at a startup, we can't really take that sort of hit. No one's going to want to work with a startup that's got a breach or like a huge incident like that. So that's kind of the stakes I usually set for people as far as making sure they understand. And once they understand the stakes, generally, they're quite good at coming to me with questions. I also try and be a lot more personable with people than I I used to be as a software engineer, to be honest with you. You need to be very approachable. You need to be very nice. Because at the end of the day, if someone does something wrong, nine times out of 10, they understand that they've done something wrong. They're already beating themselves up for it. So I always try and just come at people with a culture of sort of understanding and learning and teaching, and making sure they understand the stakes at the very end of the day.
Interesting. How do you balance like not being the bad cop all the time, but also really making them understand that there are consequences to things that could happen?
Yeah, that's tough. That's a really tough one, being kind of the only, I have sort of one counterpart who is our head of DevOps. But really, I think it just comes down to having a relationship with everyone inside the company kind of before and always keeping up to date. And I don't think we've really ever had an incident where I need to be the bad cop. I think there's probably been a couple incidents where I was a bad cop and I didn't need to be. And I've learned from that. Um, Having kind of the COO as well, as he is usually the bad cop if anything ever needs to come up. I think the strategy we've kind of put together is like he's going to be the bad cop if anything needs to happen. Like he's going to deal with that, make sure things go down, and I'm more just kind of making sure people understand the mistakes and really fixing things. Because at the end of the day, no one's gonna. It's not going to be a good culture of security if people are scared of the one guy who actually does it at the company. So it's a kind of a balancing act where I give a bit of that responsibility over to my COO, that does the bad cop act.
Interesting. That's a convenient arrangement. Is
It
that
definitely is for me. I don't want to be the bad cop, not anymore at least.
interesting? It sounds like there's some story behind that. What do you mean by not anymore?
Yeah. So when I was a software engineer back in the day, I was also much younger. I just kind of was very blunt. I still kind of am a bit blunt, very blunt and forward. And in a lot of companies today, especially with younger generations, they take that as very being kind of almost cruel in a way. And I think it was a misunderstanding by me that to really get the best out of people, you can't really do that. So I learned that pretty quickly as I moved into the role of both head of information security and chief of staff, that really you have to work with people. Like I said, 9 times out of 10, they understand when they've done something wrong. They understand when, maybe something isn't right, or they're worried about, maybe getting fired because it might be their first or second job out of college and they don't really know what they're doing. So always approaching people, I learned pretty quickly that approaching people with a culture of understanding and learning and really just being kind of kind in a way, rather than really being the bad cop, is always going to have better outcomes than just kind of being upset at people and making it their fault. Because at the end of the day, we got to work together to fix any issue. So that's what it's about. It's not really, we're not really a corporate company where I can just go yell at people and just kind of like get them fired, I guess, for little things. We take it very seriously, keeping people, because we're such a small company. We need to make sure that we have people that have stayed here a while, so we keep the knowledge within the company. So I think I rambled a bit there, but I think that gets the answer across.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think, have you ever been in a situation where, of course, you don't have to say any names or companies, but like a security incident happened or almost happened, and then how did you deal with it?
Um, I don't think I don't believe we've had any like true security incident. There have been a couple iterations of people not following standard policy and procedure, and I think when those happened, I kind of already learned my lesson a bit, and I kind of just came at it with, like I said, an understanding of, look, you messed up, you didn't follow the standard policy procedure, and it's not a breaking change. Like what these people did not kind of like, or they're not going to bankrupt the company. And it's not such an incident that we need to really kind of report it or anything. It's not going to cause any huge issues. It's really more of an inconvenience and learning opportunity. So it's a bit more work on my end, but I think I don't really have a great example of a huge security incident in this company. Sadly, I think the biggest one we've experienced, not incident, but vulnerability was the log4j vulnerability. That was all over our servers. So that was a lot of work by me and our head of DevOps to actually go kind of remediate that everywhere. That's probably the biggest vulnerability, not incident, that I have an example of.
That sounds like something positive, though, like that you haven't been part of anything.
Yes, it's very positive. It is very positive. Yes, I think one of the obviously I think something another CISO had always said to me is, you can make all the controls in the world. You can make sure you have the most secure servers, everything's encrypted, up to date, etc. At the end of the day, the biggest risk to any org is always going to be the people, and that's why culture is so important for keeping the company safe. So I take that. I guess I take quite a lot of pride in the fact that we haven't really had a crazy incident, and I do a lot of work in the back end to make sure that people are very aware. Like, I never want anyone to get phished, so I do a lot of phishing tests to make sure that people are like, they're getting phished by me before they get phished by someone who's actually going to phish them. So it's those sorts of things I think are extremely important to keeping a company safe. It's the realization that, at the end of the day, it's the people that are the biggest risk, and you need to have a culture of learning and understanding of information security to keep it safe.
Interesting. You say that in a startup, specifically yours, and in general, I would say that's probably true of startups, that a security incident, like different kinds, could really be the end of the company. So it's even more of a big deal. How does that statement work with like balancing? On the one hand, you're obviously educating people, you're teaching them there's a culture, but then you also have to, or do you have to also put controls, making sure people don't make, silly mistakes or mistakes that things they don't even think about necessarily? Like, how do you balance, okay, I'm educating and I think people are not going to make this stupid mistake, silly mistake,
Yeah.
but still.
The balancing act. So at least in our environment, we work with customers in a very quick way. Like a lot of our value is the speed in which we can provide that value to customers. So it has been a balancing act of, one, ensuring people understand kind of all the controls and things needed to make sure we keep our data safe, which luckily for us is fairly simple. Our data really only lives in 3 environments, and it can't live anywhere else. And there's only a couple third parties we work with. So we keep it pretty simple for people to make sure that, hey, as long as our data stays in just like these locations, like, and nowhere else, we're pretty good. And then 2, making sure that people don't make silly mistakes it's tough, because at the end of the day, if someone really wanted to, they could kind of just do it. And we try not to put too much red tape or barriers around people, because as much as I'd love to, because it's kind of my job and it keeps the company safe, it decreases their speed to value. And at any startup, really, the kind of thing you're going for is revenue. And so balancing making sure the company is safe with allowing people to work quickly to make more revenue is a really hard thing that I think I'm still figuring out, to be honest with you. There are some times where I just think to myself, hey, I really just want to like put a barrier here to make sure no one messes this up, because it's a real risk. But talking with some other people, they're just like, well, you could do that, or you could educate them on why it's a risk and kind of make sure the company understands, because it's an extremely kind of valuable thing for us to have. And not having those barriers around things that allow people to provide value is important in any startup, because, like I said, it's all about the revenue.
Interesting. How much would you say of your work is more the technical side, and how much is more management, people, things that are more soft?
It changes week to week, month to month, honestly. My role is quite an interesting one. So I had said earlier that I started as a software engineer. I still do a bit of software engineering on the side because I like it, and also because the company needs it to provide value. I am also the head of information technology. So I manage all of our sort of information technology infrastructure, as well as managing all of our information security. So it's a lot of kind of base level, making sure things are kept up to date, making sure things are maintained, making sure the latest controls are in place. Um, I'd honestly say it's 50-50 as far as kind of technical work and managing people. The more onboardings we have, the more sort of management I have to do to get people up to date and make sure they understand the company, as well as the chief of staff role. That has me working a fair amount in business operations. So I find myself sort of tangentially managing people in that role as well. So I really can't give you a good answer. It really just kind of changes day to day and really depends where the fire is too, what I need to focus on that day.
Interesting. And if I look at that, seems like you have a lot of different roles attached to keeping the company safe. And how do you keep updated? Like, it's a super fast growing field. Things are changing all the time, new technologies, new events going on in the world affecting you. Like, how does it work in terms of time management?
Yeah, so I think it's really just constant vigilance, and a lot of black coffee. To be honest with you, so I wake up every morning, like I said, and I drink coffee, and I take the first 15 to 30 minutes to read about what's going on in the cyber world, information technology world, see if there's threats or vulnerabilities. Um, I am also the type of person who is okay with being always on. I don't While I do love kind of my free time, I don't mind having my phone on to sort of ensure that any Slacks that come through are handled or any alerts are handled or looked at, whatever. I think that's more my personality. The job has sort of become more a part of me at this rate. So how I manage it is kind of just an all-in state, I suppose. I kind of don't mind being really the true owner of all this stuff, and managing it on like a 24-hour basis, to be honest with you. So I'm hoping that answers the question pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you feel like it's a stressful role, or is it something that you've grown accustomed to?
It is a stressful role, but I have grown accustomed to it. There are certainly times where I am just super stressed. For example, we're going through a high trust audit right now. This is the second one we're doing, and that is a lot of stress because it's just a lot of things that I have to make sure we have evidence for, making sure kind of everything in its place, and then delivering all that to our assessor. Um, when any sort of vulnerability or potential incident comes up, there's always that stress as well. And new customers as well cause that stress a lot because they have their own risk assessment people come in and try and risk assess us, and that's a lot of work on my end. So you get used to it, but I would be remiss to say it's not a stressful job, especially when at a startup, it's kind of the information security at a startup is probably the last thing people think of. It's the last thing that's really valued, but it is really the first place that you can just get, screwed. If you're not up to date with everything, and for a risk assessment for a customer, like they will not work with you. Um, High trust audit, same thing. Like you need to be on point. You need to make sure everything's working well, so you can get the actual certifications. You continue to work with your customers. So it's a stressful job in the way that no one really wants to put a lot of money into the information security world, at least in startups. But you are kind of one of the biggest risks to continuing working with your current clientele and getting new clientele as well.
Interesting. What would you say is the biggest challenge right now in the cybersecurity field?
I think that goes along with the last answer. Uh, I think the biggest challenge, the fact that there's not really a lot of funding or investment in the cybersecurity world, at least in healthcare. I think with all of the current healthcare kind of breaches going on around the world, like we have the Change Healthcare breach and a few others recently, I think people are getting wise to the fact that maybe we should be funding this a bit more. You can see that in the financial area of the U.S. Like there is a lot of investment in cybersecurity because people care about protecting their money. Not so much with healthcare right now, and I think that's going to change. And I think that's the biggest challenge is kind of how do we make sure that information security, because it is extremely important to keep everyone's information safe if they're giving it to a company, is one of the most important things in a company. Like, it's one of the most paid attention to things in the company, and it's at the forefront of kind of like, hey, when you're doing your capital planning or budget meeting with the C-levels, like, revenue is important for every company, but we also need to make sure that information security is important so we don't get breached and lose a bunch of money. I think that's the biggest challenge in my mind, is just keeping information security at the forefront of most companies.
It's interesting because I know that a lot of what I've heard, especially with the everything that is like PII and the like HIPAA related things, like, because it's such a high cost to losing anything, to like even losing a small part of information, I would assume that companies that are health tech would be investing more money in it. So you're saying that that's not the case really overall?
I think some companies are, and I certainly think huge like insurers are. For example, like Change Healthcare with their breach, I could only imagine how much money is being spent on all the other large payers in the world to ensure that information security is a huge deal. But then you look at smaller companies that work with healthcare tech, or health tech, startups or whatever, and they're focused on revenue. That's always going to be the focus, and it's the focus of our company as well. So it's really kind of for them, like, how do you get an MVP of information security to make sure everything's safe, while maximizing revenue? And I think that's good for a while, but at some point you need to make sure that information security is not at the bottom of the list when it comes to kind of where you put your budget. I think it's changing. I think it's changing slowly, and I think kind of in the future we're going to see more of that change. It's just going to take a while.
Interesting. How do you feel about AI?
I think AI. I'll give you my quick software engineering spiel because I always talk about this with some friends. I think AI for the world is a great thing, and it's going to allow people to really speed up how much work they can do, and increase kind of their production rate. On the same line, I think AI is also going to decrease the amount of kind of experts that come out in the world. I think especially in software engineering, people that are going to college and things like that, they're going to learn less because they're going to lean on AI more. And that's going to cause kind of an issue eventually where we get to this point where people aren't really, sysadmin experts or experts in kind of languages that are unknown because they've been using AI and they don't have to really debug that stuff. I think it's going to cause a knowledge gap at some point where there's just not enough people to kind of handle crazy things. Like on the information security side, generative AI, and to be fair, N1 Health is a AI company. Really, we use predictive machine learning models, which is under the umbrella of AI. We don't use generative AI with our clients. Generative AI in the healthcare world is really frowned upon right now, mostly because there's not a lot of controls around it. Recently, High Trust, which is kind of, like I said, the gold standard, they released their version 11 of High Trust, and that has a whole slew of AI controls that a lot of companies haven't moved there yet, ourselves included. So we are lacking on the controls side, and that's something we need to start updating soon. So while I think AI is going to be an extremely useful thing for society, especially when it keeps iterating, I do think it's going to cause a lot of issues in the, I guess, learning and growth department, because people are not going to have to go on these random, rabbit holes through, the internet to find fixes to issues. They can just use Gen AI to find them. So they're going to learn a lot less random stuff that they don't need, while being able to work quicker. So it's a pro and con sort of deal, in my opinion. I don't know if that's kind of the answer you were looking for there, but that's my general feelings on AI.
Interesting. What is one thing that security professionals, CISOs, are not paying enough attention to?
That's a good question. I don't really know what they're not paying attention to. I have to think about that one. Hmm. I guess maybe not. Honestly, maybe the answer is simply just revenue. I'm in an interesting position. As I had said, I'm also the chief of staff of the startup. Um, and so before I had that role, I really had no clue or didn't really care about kind of the revenue of the company and how information security impacted it. Um, and while I don't know the experience of every CISO ever, um, I can imagine that there's a lot of technical people in that role that had never had to go through the kind of rigmarole of being on the business side and dealing with revenue. So I think the thing that's probably overlooked is the fact that information security impacts revenue in such a way because it's one, it takes away budget, and then two, it can impact revenue by decreasing speed to value by putting up red tape and barriers and things like that along the way for people. Um, Prime example is working with customers. There is a fair amount of red tape I need to put up if we ever want to work with a vendor, because they need to have a risk assessment. They need to be, they need to go through a whole kind of bunch of controls that I've set up to make sure that they are good to work with, safe to work with. And that decreases speed, and that in some cases can impact revenue. So yeah, I think that's probably my answer is I think not enough people pay attention to the importance of revenue in every company. They kind of just think of things as a job. And information security, as well as a slew of other kind of business units, should pay more attention to kind of the revenue of their company and how they're impacting it. Because while they might not impact it directly, there are a lot of indirect impacts you can make, such as putting up less barriers for people to actually do their work, things like that.
On the other side of that, what do you think is one people that don't understand security, like people who aren't from the security field, don't understand about security, like are missing?
Yeah, I think the one thing people don't understand outside of security is probably the fact that things can go from like really calm and simple and nothing's happening to, there's some crazy fire that we need to deal with or the company is going to like go under. Things like that. I think in a lot of jobs, software coming from the software engineering world, software engineering especially, it's just kind of like you're working on code iterations and you're doing stuff. You're not really in the DevOps space. You don't have to worry about production servers. And so it's the fact that there is some crazy thing that can happen that can just blow up your day in about 2 seconds. Um, the other thing I think people don't understand about security is kind of the breadth of the actual, information security landscape. Um, there needs to be controls for almost every single business unit in any company imaginable set up by information security. There needs to be controls set on HR. There need to be controls set up on software engineering, DevOps, sales, etc. Vendor management, things like that. And it's just the fact that there's this such wide kind of spanning um, breadth of controls that people don't really notice or pay attention to because they don't have to deal with it. But information security is sort of everywhere, and it needs to be. Um, so I think that's probably a good enough answer at this point.
Interesting. Have you seen security change a lot over the past few years?
Um, I think so, especially with the introduction of generative AI. That really shook up the security world. And as I said before, with High Trust coming out with High Trust V11, um, it's the fact that there's just so many more things you need to pay attention to. Now there's a whole other thing. Software engineering had its make sure there's review and tests and all the vendors are kind of risk assessed, things like that. Now there's this whole other thing, which is AI, that you need to pay attention to and make sure that, we need to have a quarterly review and inventory of all our machine learning models because, AI is the thing now. And no one was really paying attention to it before. There were not really a lot of information security controls on it before, but now that it's in the spotlight, it's just more things we need to pay attention to in the information security world.
How do you see it going in the next few years?
With like I said, all the breaches that are happening recently, I I think we're going to see a lot more controls and hardening of information security be set up. And I think it's going to become a harder job in general. It's going to become a lot more stringent, and you'll just need more people to handle that. I can't say for sure kind of what the next big thing that is going to impact information security will be, but I can say for sure that we're going to keep kind of as a information security landscape iterating and making sure that there are, new ways to keep people safe and keep people's data safe.
Interesting. What would you say to someone who's thinking of going into security, maybe doing something similar right now or just leaving college?
I would think about it long and hard. I would definitely consider the fact that there are a plethora of roles in the information security landscape that you can start in. Mine was obviously not traditional, but you can start as like a penetration tester or really a underwriter for like policies and procedures, things like that. And there's so many roles you can kind of start out in. And it's really, where do you want to end up? Do you want to end up being the kind of person who has a wide overview of the entire org as far as information security goes and making sure that everything's up to date, managing people, making sure that they keep everything up to date, things like that, or not? If you want a more technical implementation role, this is probably not the role you want to take. A lot of it becomes sort of management and working with people rather than kind of the software engineering route where you're more just implementing things technically. So I think it's a really great role to be in. I do think it's a role people probably don't think enough about when they get into it, as far as like where they can go in the future. So I would say if people really want a career and grow in the security world, honestly, joining a startup is probably the best place to go, to be honest with you. You join a big company, you got to go through the whole like 20-year, role of just kind of doing your job for 20 years, and maybe you make it to like a VP of information security role. But if you go to a, early stage startup or something like that, as long as you're willing to learn and take on responsibility, you can sort of, make information security a real thing at a startup, which is, pretty rare that it exists at early stage startups, at least in a really formal fashion.
Interesting. And we're almost at our last questions. I'd love to know, in the field of cybersecurity, what on the one hand keeps you up at night, and then on the other hand gets you super excited to continue this route? Because it's a pretty stressful job. It's not, there's like easier things to do, but you're still there and you look like you're enjoying it.
Yeah, there are definitely easier things to do. That is 100% true. I think what keeps me up at night is just the risk that I inherit in the org. Being really the only person, one of very few people at the very least, who truly understands information security at our organization and truly understands the gravity of the situation if someone were to do something silly and get us breached or have some crazy incident. That keeps me up at night. It's the amount of risk I have in my hands and the fact that I kind of have to very carefully just juggle things to keep the company going. What gets me up every day in the morning is the fact that kind of the same fact, like I have a ton of responsibility at this company. I love that. And also the fact that it's just a continuous learning job. There's always something new to learn. There's always something new to do. And especially at a startup, if you're willing to kind of take on more responsibility than is your general job, there's more to learn and kind of more ways to grow. So I've been definitely thinking about the security route for a while, and I think I'll probably stay in it as well as doing some other stuff at my startup. Because I think, maybe one day I want to start my own company, and I think having a basis of security as well as business knowledge is a good idea.
Amazing. Okay, so one final question, and thank you so much for the time and for everything you said so far before that. What is one of the more memorable, interesting, weird situations that you've come across over the years of doing security?
Oh, um, I guess I'll probably start with the fact that I started in cybersecurity or information security in the first place. Um, when I kind of started this journey, I looked at, I read the entirety of High Trust as far as what we're scoped for, which is not a fun thing to do. It takes a while and it's a lot of understanding. Um, and I looked at what we had and I said to myself, boy, do I have a lot of work ahead of me? Because while we had sort of the basic, HIPAA stuff, we had a lot of good, like, uh, general technical controls, like encryption, things like that. Um, there was no real record of all of this. And that's a lot of information security, which people don't really like about it, is the fact that there's so much bookkeeping and everything needs to be a paper trail and there needs to be proof of literally everything. It was just a lot of work ahead of me. So that's probably one of my most interesting, crazy memories, to be honest with you, was the fact that I kind of started at, a 12% goodness on information security at the company, and I needed to get to like 100 or like 95 in the space of like a year. Setting all that up, I had to write like 100 pages, probably like 150 pages of policy and procedure documents. I had to implement all of this kind of bookkeeping and making sure we actually recorded, reviews and making sure that everything encrypted, things like that, inventorying assets. Um, that was an experience. I don't wish it upon anyone, to be honest with you.
It
But
sounds really fun.
yeah, you certainly learn a lot, at the very least, especially when you have to kind of eventually show this to companies or customers.
Amazing. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for your time and for coming on the show. This has been super interesting.
Thank you, Addie. Thank you for having me. I look forward to kind of, seeing more of what you guys bring in the future with people, and I'd be more than happy to come back on again if you feel like it.